and he is now covering Miami 4-on-3 at Kane Sport, and that's EJ Holland. EJ, welcome to the show. Good to see you, my friend.
What's up, Billy? How's it going?
It's going great, man. Going great. So tell us a little bit about Kane Sport, your role moving into this Miami market, and what fans can expect.
Yeah, no, for sure. The transition's been awesome. Moving over from covering Michigan to Miami, a little bit different, but I'm excited to cover Miami. I think it's the best program to be covering right now when you look at what they're doing in the transfer portal, what they're doing NIL wise, what they're doing with recruiting. They're checking every box and they're kind of setting the standard in this new era of college football. I think Miami, you saw the run of the national championship this year. I think they've kind of, set themselves up to have long-term success with the way they're approaching things in all those phases. And, covering Miami, I'm going to be, moving down to Florida. So I'm excited about that. I know you're a Florida native, Billy. So excited to get down to Florida. Miami obviously has a ton of backyard talent from a recruiting perspective, but they've taken a more national approach as well. It's kind of crazy seeing how many national guys Miami is in the mix for to go along with, the hotbed of talent that they have in their own backyard. So obviously I'll be covering recruiting, and the transfer portal is so big in this era. So excited to see, what Miami continues to do there. I'll be covering it all over at canesport.com, but just really excited. I was on Michigan for 6 years, just felt like it was time for a change. And, Miami's, a great fit for me. So I'm super excited about the role.
As you jump into Miami, and I know these things behind the scenes for all of us are set in stone usually long before, so you probably got to watch Miami pretty closely on the transfer portal. What were a couple of key positions that really impressed you as far as what Miami accomplished in the transfer portal?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the headliner was Darian Mensah, and that whole situation was kind of crazy just with the lawsuit and everything. But I think Miami's done a great job, obviously, of landing quarterbacks out of the portal. You had Cam Ward, Carson Beck. Now you have Darian Mensah, who will be one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football next year. So he's kind of leading an offense that is revamped a little bit and also brings back some key weapons. You look at the guys they surrounded him with out of the portal. They went, kind of wide receiver heavy. They landed his teammate Cooper Barkate, who will be obviously an instant impact player. There's already chemistry there. So, those two are going to link up early and often. They added a big time vertical threat and Vandravius Jacobs, another productive wide receiver in Cam Vaughn out of West Virginia. So, they added some really nice pieces on the offensive side of the ball. And that's not to mention the guys they have coming back, Mark Fletcher, one of the best running backs in the country. And then obviously the most explosive guy in the country, Malachi Toney. So you put all those transfer pieces together. You have Toney, you have Fletcher, you have Alex Mirabal coaching the offensive line. This offense is going to be dangerous and one of the best in the country. And, Miami always takes care of the defensive side of the ball as well. They added some key pieces like Damon Wilson, an edge transfer from Mizzou. I believe he was third in the SEC in sacks last year. Keona Davis, defensive line transfer from Nebraska, will get in the rotation. Omar Thornton from Boston College will be an impact player in the secondary. So again, the Canes just reload, whether it's recruiting, whether it's portal. Again, I think they're set up for long-term success.
I think Darian Mensah is obviously there's all the off-field stuff, which we're not going to get into. It's all settled. He's there. But what he's been able to do the last couple of years, just I think building from that Tulane spot to what he did at Duke in this past year and the top returning passer now in the ACC, going to be headed to Miami and getting into the mix right away in spring. Carson Beck sat out last year in terms of spring. He was recovering from injury, but he was on campus. He was able to kind of go through things with the guys and learn the offense. Darian Mensah has that opportunity to get right to work. And for Darian, having 2 years of eligibility is great. We'll see if Miami, ultimately keeps him from the draft after next year. But he is certainly one that I think is going to be obviously in the Heisman Trophy discussion. But people are going to learn a little bit more about this wide receiver core for Miami this year because even though Malachi Tony's explosive, even though we saw what CJ Daniels could do in that offense, I still don't think the playmakers at Miami are talked about nationally enough and what they do for their quarterbacks. Malachi Tony in year 2, Cooper Barkade. This offense is just really going to be dangerous. And I think in part because you have all that time in the spring to get acclimated.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think anytime you bring in new pieces, especially from the portal, it's not like recruiting where guys come in as freshmen, they're part of a class, they get to kind of develop together and go through strength and conditioning workouts and practices together for multiple years. These guys are plug and play, and spring will be so pivotal for them, just picking up the playbook, getting used to being a Miami Hurricane, getting acclimated with each other. I mean, the good thing, like I mentioned, is Darian Mensah and Cooper Barkade played together last year at Duke. So that chemistry is already there. I don't think it'll be hard for Mensah to build up some chemistry with Malachi Tony. And then Mark Fletcher, I covered him as a recruit, even though I wasn't on the Miami beat, but he is a fantastic kid. And I think everybody around Miami will tell you how high character or how much character he has and how much of a leader he is. And I think he can get some guys, going pretty quickly as well, just from a leadership perspective. And it takes some pressure off of Mensah as well, just having such a great offensive line and such a battering back in Fletcher. I'm excited to see what Mensah looks like. Like you said, he should be in the Heisman Trophy running when it's all said and done. But yeah, I think all these guys will have an opportunity to gel quickly. I think the culture at Miami is really high under Mario Cristobal. So, sky's the limit for Miami this year and moving forward.
When you look at the top 10 recruiting class and how it came together, the headliner, number 1 overall prospect on the Rivals industry ranking, Jackson Cantwell. This was a commitment that came fairly early, I would say, in a sense. We're seeing guys commit earlier and earlier, but Miami went toe-to-toe with the nation's best. They ultimately get him. What does this addition with Francis Mauigoa out the door, Markel Bell out the door, what does that mean for this Miami offensive line and the expectations that he's got going into the season?
Yeah, I think you don't often see true freshman offensive linemen make an impact that often, but you have seen it at Miami. You mentioned Francis. So I think Jackson Cantwell will have an opportunity to come in and potentially start right away. I mean, he's an elite talent, obviously the number 1 offensive tackle in the country, number 1 overall prospect in the country per the industry ranking. But he has a massive frame. 6'7.5", 325 pounds. He's a true tackle, true towering tackle prospect. He's a guy who is extremely dominant in the run game. Usually when you have those tall tackles, they can struggle to bend and get low and finish off blocks in the run game, especially early on in their career. Not Jackson Cantwell. He's extremely athletic. He has a great background. His parents were Olympians. He's one of the best shot putters in the nation. So he's a guy who you can see that athleticism transfer from tape, to the field right away here at Miami. So he's a guy, again, that's super dominant in the run game. He needs to kind of polish up a little bit as a pass protector, just because at the high school level, he played in a predominantly run heavy offense. But under Alex Mirabal, who's, again, one of the best offensive line coaches in the country and a fantastic teacher. Everybody I've spoken to in my first couple of weeks on the Miami beat just talks about how great of a developer Alex Mirabal is. And you saw the dominant play from the offensive line at Miami this year. So I think Cantwell getting there early, getting a chance to develop this winter and going into spring, I think he'll have a chance to compete for a starting spot, as a true freshman. And again, he just checks a lot of boxes. Obviously, when you bring in the number 1 player in the country, you have high expectations. So, and it's crazy. I just got back from the Rivals camp in Miami, and the Hurricanes are in the mix for Mark Matthews, who's the number 1 offensive tackle in 2027. So the Hurricanes are really looking to build that offensive line first and win in the trenches, just like they did this past season. We talked about the exciting lands of Darian Mensah and Cooper Barkade, and everybody knows Malachi Tony, but Miami's done a great job of fortifying the offensive line, adding that top tier talent, across the trenches. And if they can land Matthews next cycle to go along with Jackson Cantwell, man, this wall of an offensive line will be set up for many years.
And defensively, Corey Heatherman he came in year one and just completely changed the mindset of that defense. And obviously, it helps to have stars like Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor and Keontae Scott and some of these other players. But so much of this Miami team, I think their swagger, their confidence really came from this defense and their ability to kind of set the tone and be game wreckers and all of those things. You add Keona Davis, you add Damon Wilson. Omar Thornton, another ACC on ACC crime there, coming over to the program. I think this defense in year two, with their ability to pick up the terminology and add more to it now, there's going to be a lot of fun had by Corey Heatherman, I think, this year. They do have some major pieces they've got to replace, but we know Miami's recruiting at a high level too on the defense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, defensively, you look at what they did in the recruiting class, again, focusing in on the trenches. You saw what Mesidor and Bain were able to do this past year. They added Ashari Charles, who's a little bit of, a shorter edge, which is completely fine. Miami obviously had a lot of success with the guys I mentioned. He was a late riser who burst into the top 100. They had a flip from Keyshawn Stansel. It's another, defensive lineman who can play across the front. So a lot to like about some of the guys they landed along the defensive line. They had a big win. James Dunnigan out in Kansas, who's a top 150 safety. So I think when you look at what Miami is trying to do defensively under Corey Heatherman, they're trying to, get guys who are aggressive, great culture fits, who just play with tenacity and a relentless motor. And I think you have a lot of those guys in this recruiting class. You have some of those guys in the portal. I thought the job Heatherman did was, arguably the best in college football. He was obviously a finalist for the Broyles Award, maybe should have won that award. He's, fantastic. Those two guys, man, Alex Mirabal, Corey Heatherman, those two assistants are, again, among the best in the country and so valuable for Mario Cristobal's staff. And I think when you're landing the talent that Miami is landing and you couple that with elite coaching and development from your defensive coordinator and your offensive line coach, again, sustained success at Miami, there's no question it's going to happen.
Let's look ahead a little bit in the future of Miami and their recruiting efforts to continue to bring players like Malachi Tony and some of these homegrown guys. What's the temperature down there as far as Miami, the city, and how difficult it is and how competitive it is? Or are we seeing the fruits of that labor for Miami, the program investing and making that national championship game? Are you already starting to see that wheel really turn now that they've taken that step from, okay, we see the talent, we see the infrastructure and investment. Even last year, we didn't see it come to fruition with Cam Ward. Now that they've gone all the way to the national title game, you see in Miami that fence get, more constructed and even more sturdier down there.
Yeah. I mean, I think Miami now is very well positioned to keep their top talent at home. I mentioned Mark Matthews, again, the number one offensive tackle in the country, the number two overall recruit. I think he has an argument for the number one overall recruit nationally. So, he's at St. Thomas Aquinas, and, that school is obviously always loaded with top tier talent. Talking to Matthews yesterday, you can just see the excitement when, you bring up the Hurricanes and Alex Mirabal and what they did along the offensive line. And so I think Miami's the early leader there. The Rivals recruiting prediction machine certainly reflects that. And I think Miami's in-state recruiting starts with Mark Matthews. But aside from Matthews, I mean, they already have 3 in-state guys committed, including Amari Stevens, who's a Rivals 300 wide receiver, electric, has verified track times. I think they're working their way around the state. Guys like Caden Henderson, who's one of the top linebackers nationally. He told me when I spoke to him last month, he was like, hey, man, I wasn't super high on Miami, but what they did this season, what Corey Heatherman did with the defense, I mean, Miami's vaulted themselves back into that top group. So, yeah, I mean, across the state, not just in South Florida, I think a lot of these in-state prospects aren't just taking notice of Miami. They're really buying in to what Miami's building. I think they're going to have a lot of these guys on campus. But I think the important thing to note with Miami is, yeah, you have that hotbed of talent. It's always going to be important to keep homegrown talent. But the way Miami has recruited nationally has been extremely impressive. I mean, you look at the 26 class, you went out to Missouri to land Cantwell. One of your top 100 lands, Gavin Mueller, was from Illinois. We talked about James Dunnigan, who's from Kansas. I mean, the national footprint that Miami is building in this new era of NIL, where they're able to go out and just get the best players regardless of where they're from, is extremely impressive. So again, I think that's another big reason why Miami is so well positioned for the future. When you have that amount of talent in your own backyard, and you're also able to go out nationally and recruit the best of the best, Miami's going to win in the portal every year, but they're also going to win on the recruiting trail every year.
You have a list of biggest needs in this 2027 class for Miami and what they need to go out and attack when it comes to building this roster for next, the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, Miami's always going to put a premium on the trenches. So I think, continuing to bolster the offense and defensive line will be big. I think linebacker is definitely a position they need to attack. I mentioned Caden Henderson up in the Tampa area. He's a top target. Noah Glover is a Rivals 300 linebacker out here in Virginia, who Corey Heatherman saw twice during the winter contact period. Continuing to build the secondary as well will be key. They're in it with several top targets on the back end. Obviously, they just lost their corners coach in Zach Etheridge, so it'll be interesting to see who Miami replaces there. But they're in it with several guys on the back end, including the number one corner in the country, Joshua Dobson, who received a visit during the winter contact period. So again, I think it starts from the trenches out. I think Miami's always going to be able to supplement their recruiting with the transfer portal wins. And we talked about the guys they added, at quarterback, at wide receiver. So, those positions are still valuable. Miami's still going to take a high school quarterback every class, but with what they've been able to do in the portal, I'm not really concerned about Miami's quarterback recruiting moving forward, or even really their wide receiver recruiting moving forward. I mean, again, they're able to get guys out of the portal. They're able to win guys that are close to home. You go to Florida to get wide receivers. And so Miami's going to continue to do that on the recruiting trail. But yeah, I would say linebackers, secondary, and just continuing to build those trenches are key for the 2027 recruiting class.
EJ Holland, we appreciate the time, my friend. Thank